So, before we get started today, a quick heads up for the end of this month. At the end of August, I'll be at Destination D in Florida. Typically, there are announcements at Destination D about the future of the Disney company that we'll talk about here on the podcast. But as Destination D happens on Saturday and Sunday, this means that I'll be recording most of that episode on Monday. So for that week only, our podcast won't post on Sunday night like usual, but will instead post early in the week, probably either late on Monday or on Tuesday. So when you don't see the episode at its usual time, just remember, it will come out instead early in the week. But now on to far more interesting things, especially in terms of our series about Disney legend Mary Blair. We are now up to the point where Mary's life again is going to expand in terms of the art she creates. We're also at the point where the stylized children that she has been drawing or painting for over a dozen years begins to connect with image-conscious Americans in the 1950s. We're also going to see how Mary's vision and her abilities as an illustrator begin to expand far beyond the world of Hollywood and into other centers of popular American culture in the middle of the 20th century. That is, we're going to pick up right where we left off last week. So if you have all of that, let's go. By the start of 1952, Mary was in a very different place than when she'd lived in California 6 years earlier. She was one of the most successful artists at the Disney studio, the only one who worked remotely. She was now the mother of 2 young children, and following her success in publishing, she began to expand out her illustration and design work for New York-based companies. To understand the level of success that Mary found in 1952, it's important to remember the median yearly income for an individual at that time was $2,300. For a family together, it was $3,900 per year. From Disney alone, Mary made $300 a week. If working full-time, she would make $15,600 a year, nearly 7 times the national average. But in 1952, based on her income statements, it appears she pared back on her work with Disney, likely to focus on her boys. Beyond Disney, Mary took on other assignments, ones where she could work around her life as a mother. From Little Golden Books, she accepted another contract to create illustrations for a title initially called The Golden Songbook, for which she was paid $3,500. She continued to receive money from her Christmas cards, both from Walt Disney Productions and Hallmark, just under $500. She created a poster for Metropolitan Life at $250. She took on commissioned work from individual clients totaling roughly $2,500. She sold an illustration to Parents Magazine for $60. And she began to take on projects for advertising firms. Among the first of these advertising assignments was a set of illustrations for Bluebell Garments, who made casual and school clothes for children. For Bluebell, Mary adapted the Mary Blair child into a range of ages, from toddlers to 12-year-olds, showing readers how Bluebell could dress children no matter their age. For her initial illustrations, she was paid $200, but following the campaign's success, she continued to work not only with Bluebell for years, but also on other advertising campaigns, almost always using some version of her flat, stylized children enjoying or wearing the company's products. As Mary found herself in demand, she hired a business manager, Celine Brevant, who lived in Cape Cod, to oversee sales and review contracts. Her largest project that year, one that stretched her abilities, wasn't for film, publishing, or advertising, all familiar businesses for Mary. It was as an art and set director for the Radio City Music Hall's Christmas show, an assignment for which she received $2,000. It's likely that Mary was introduced to the show's director, Leon Leonidoff, through her connections with Disney. Some Disney features, including Snow White, had had their New York premieres at Radio City. For 1952, Disney had arranged for its new cartoon, Pluto's Christmas Tree, to be included in the Christmas show itself before live acts entered the stage. The live acts were Leon Leonidoff's specialty. His Christmas productions included ballet, short comedic skits, often a nativity scene, and live music, all of which required elaborate set designs. In 1952, the presentation would move through many short musical segments, including Santa, an ensemble singing Home for the Holidays, trained poodles performing tricks, and the Rockettes dancing as toy soldiers before the presentation concluded with a feature film. But the centerpiece of the extended show was the live acts, produced by Leonidoff, with sets for some show segments created by Mary. Just as she was engaging this work, she learned that her father, after seeing his health decline for years, had passed away in California. On September 8, 1952, John Robinson died. He was 74 years old, a beloved member of the family. His death almost surely affected Mary's ability to focus on her Radio City project. For Mary, work on this stage show was more nerve-wracking than any of her previous assignments. A large part of this was attributed to the loss of her father. Beyond this, though, her personality traits slanted toward being a creative introvert. She enjoyed working alone in her home studio, where she focused on drawings and paintings without interruption. Her assignments for publishing and advertising allowed her to endlessly revise her work until a client was satisfied. That fall, when she traveled to California, her friends at the studio saw that she was in a difficult space, both personally and professionally. Not only was stagecraft an unfamiliar medium, its deadlines were inflexible, as the Christmas program had a firm opening date. Now that Retta Scott had moved away from Disney and from California, Hazel George became one of Mary's closest friends at the studio. They had dinner together, they went on weekend trips, they also wrote poetry together, just like Mary's sisters had done when she was young. Hazel George saw that following her father's death, the stage show pushed Mary into uncomfortable territory. Mary did the Christmas show at Radio City, Hazel explained, and she was just terrified. Walt, too, saw how much she struggled with her current assignment, so he arranged for Hazel George to accompany her to New York as the production went through rehearsals. Walt agreed to that, Hazel George said. He said, take good care of her. Hazel stayed at her house, met Kevin, who had recently turned 2, and accompanied Mary to the theater. I kept trying to reassure her, she added, but nothing was going to reassure Mary until the production was complete and ready to be performed. We went to dress rehearsal, Hazel added. They saw the nativity scene, the holiday carolers, and the Rockettes as toy soldiers. Everything went perfectly, Hazel said. She couldn't ask for a better presentation. Relieved that her elements in the show looked good on stage, Mary took Hazel to a bar to get a few martinis before returning home. We got drunk to celebrate, Hazel explained. The show was well received, and Mary's work for Radio City would continue for 3 more Christmas productions as well as for 1 Easter pageant. Hazel remained with Mary for a few days. Her impressions of her home in Great Neck was that it was a good place to raise kids. Hazel believed the Blairs had a happy marriage, yet she was aware of Lee's drinking, something that was far more common now than it had been when he had lived in California. Lee would give you a lot of assistance when it comes to drinking, Hazel said. I think that's how Mary got a little bit involved with booze. To be fair, in the 1950s, most of the industries where Mary worked, publishing studios, and advertising were known for their 2 or 3 martini lunches. Most Disney artists as well would think nothing of ordering a couple of cocktails with lunch. But Hazel George did make an important observation around this time, namely that Lee had become more interested in drinking. To a lesser extent, at least initially, Mary had as well. It was part of the culture. It was also a coping mechanism for 2 parents that struggled with the demands of work and home life. Shortly after the Christmas holidays, Mary discussed with Lee the possibility of leaving Disney and focusing on her project-by-project assignments in New York. They both agreed that, with 2 young children, this would be the best plan for their family. Mary resigned from Disney on February 1, 1953. At the time, she was one of the highest-paid individuals at the studio with a base pay of $300 per week before bonuses. Again, a wage that was many times higher than what most Americans received. "I had 3 jobs," Mary explained, "raising children, keeping house, and doing my artwork." But even after she left the Disney studio, she remained in contact with Walt. Her friendship with Walt remained important to her, far more than it had for most artists who left the studio. 2 weeks later, she wrote him a note about Peter Pan a few days after the film was released. "The picture is excellent in all respects," she said. "The fact that there are lines of anxious spectators extending around the block several times, waiting to see the show, is well justified." She also said that she was proud to have had a very small part in the film itself. She closed by saying, "You have a great thing there, and all my admiration." For the past 15 years, Mary had worked for various animation studios from iWorks to MGM to Disney. But now her life was focused on motherhood and commercial illustration. In 1953, she produced illustrations for Meadow Gold Dairy, a series of print advertisements that featured the Mary Blair children in their purest form. Images of kids roughly 4 and 5 years old, with their slightly enlarged heads, simple mouths, and eyes that expressed wonder and kindness. A typical Meadow Gold magazine ad, arranged by Mary from 1953, featured a young girl seated at a table holding a carton of Meadow Gold milk. Beside her was an orange brindled cat that was also enjoying the milk. Cats would soon become common figures in Mary's ads, as now that she was home full-time with no more flights to California, she always had a pet cat with her, if not 2. The Meadow Gold girl, nearly identical to the girl Mary had used in I Can Fly, would soon be featured in ads for a range of other dairy products, from butter to cottage cheese to ice cream. The girl's image was so central to the ad campaign that, in effect, the girl would soon become a symbol for the company. With the family's increased income, 1953 was also the year that the Blairs finally built a custom house to suit the needs of both the kids and Mary's work. The house was arranged on 3 acres at 110 Beach Street, with custom designs overseen by architect George Nemini. Just as Lee had wanted, their lot had green space at the back that opened to mature pine trees and a pond. Just beyond the pond was the open bay. This house, too, would have a studio with 18-foot-tall ceilings for Mary, a section of the structure built on stilts overlooking their land, similar to the large, high studio at the top of their 3-story house in California. Her studio even had a sliding glass door that opened to an elevated balcony where she could look out over the world. As one of Mary's nieces recalled, Lee and Mary had about 3 acres on Long Island, had a pond, big tall trees, and the pond would freeze over in the winter and they'd all go skating on the pond, but oh, the house was just gorgeous. Had black slate polished floors with white silicate rugs and a contemporary sofa around a stone fireplace with the black hood. So it was a circular fireplace, wonderful things. Once finished, the house was featured as one of the Architectural Record's 25 Houses of the Year, calling it a secluded studio for work or a quiet repose away from the bustle of normal family activities. A writer and photographer visited the finished, furnished house to take photos for the magazine. Interestingly, Lee did not identify himself as an artist. In the article, the owners of the house are listed as writer Lee Blair and his artist wife Mary. In this, Lee was now introducing himself as someone who developed scripts and content for his company, not at all how he would have described himself even a few years earlier. The house, however, solidifies Lee's image as a successful executive and, to a lesser extent, Mary's image as a professional illustrator. That Christmas, Walt sent Mary a note, beginning with a tongue-in-cheek line. Now that you've divorced yourself from Disney and have become a freelancer, I'm only going to send you a card for Christmas, but the children, that's different. A box of things have been sent to them. All of us are very happy for you, and we just want you and Lee to have all the kinds of success which you both so rightly deserve. In the meantime, if you ever have any time on your hands, please let us know about it. In this, Walt tacitly left the door open in case Mary wanted to return to Disney, even on a part-time basis. A few days later, Mary replied, Dear Walt, your letter is more treasured than 1,000 gifts. As for the children, you shouldn't have, but they love you for it. I really miss seeing you and Lily. Please call me if you're in our neck of the woods. After receiving gifts one year, Mary's older son included a photo he had taken. On its back was written, likely by Mary, to Walt and Lillian from Donovan. Walt placed the photo in his studio office, even though Mary no longer worked there. As a family, the mid-1950s contained some of their best years. Clearly, problems were percolating, but were not yet spiking through to the surface. Problems were kept in check because of the tremendous work Lee and Mary needed to accomplish. Lee was still growing his business, attempting to more fully focus on TV. Mary was developing her new career as a commercial illustrator in New York, and then there were the kids who needed to be cared for. Simply, there wasn't time to explore any underlying problems. In her personal watercolors from this period, Mary painted her boys, often indoors, grouped together. They were typically holding hands, the older Donovan next to Kevin. Her paintings never included Lee or even herself, which perhaps revealed how her gaze was arranged inside her home. As the Blairs were now living close to the water, Lee took on sailing. His first vessel was a 24-foot sailboat called the Valiant, which was the maiden name of Mary's mother, Varda Valiant Robinson. Varda, as a widow, now lived with Mary's older sister Peggy in Campbell, California, not far from her previous home in Morgan Hill. But the death of Mary's father, John, shifted the family's overall identity. Whereas previous family gatherings were more focused on staying connected with John and Varda, now family gatherings were more focused on the adults connecting with the kids. Specifically, Mary's California relatives spending time with Kevin and Donovan, and with Mary spending time with Peggy's two daughters, Maggie and Jean. In 1954, Mary stayed in contact with Walt, also with friends at the studio. A few days after Walt premiered his weekly TV show on ABC, Mary sent him a note of congratulations. Your television program is such a pleasant departure from the usual and promises to be an all-out must for every family. She mentioned that now, with the two boys, she was only working on a few freelance projects from home. This was likely to explain why she hadn't taken Walt up on his offer to occasionally work for the studio. "We think of you," Mary concluded, "and are all for your new venture," which included not only the TV show, but the park he was building in Anaheim. 1 week later, Walt wrote back. "We miss you around here," he began. "The place is humming with activity. Often things come up that make us wish that you were here to help us out. So when Disneyland is functioning about July next year, you'll have to pack up your tribe, Lee included, and come out for a visit. You may be sure that the Blair family will be given all the privileges extended to any VIP who shows up." The following summer, 1955, Mary did not visit Disneyland, at least not yet, but instead remained in New York to focus on her boys. With Kevin in kindergarten and Donovan in third grade, Mary became a traditional mother. She made them box lunches and took them to school every day. Now working project to project with most of her time focused on the kids, Mary reflected on how her life had changed. 10 years earlier, she had toured North, Central, and South America for Disney. Now most of that adventurousness or even independence receded for a while. In their place was an impulse to bring happiness to her family and to protect them from problems. It was the 1950s, the age of the idealized nuclear family, but more than this, Mary had grown up in a family who had protected her from the harshness of the world, from struggles that were difficult to solve. One of Mary's nieces explained that she could see this impulse in not only Mary, but to some extent Lee. "I think just because our family was close, there was no trauma and drama until the kids got older." Mary and Lee were trying to replicate their own childhood experiences, even though the world of the mid-1950s was very different, especially in terms of business expectations, than the world of the early 19-teens. Mary still had a sense of flamboyance to her, particularly in her sense of fashion, but it was softened a little by her maternal role. The Blairs regularly reached out to Mary's sisters and nieces as well as to Varda to maintain strong family connections, which either meant visiting Mary's relatives in California or inviting them to New York. One regular visitor was Mary's older niece, Jean. When she came to New York, Mary took her to plays, to restaurants, and department stores. Jean recalled that Mary always wore her bright colors, smelled of expensive perfume, and had a beautiful laugh. On one trip, when both nieces were with her, Mary explained how they could present themselves a little more as sophisticated individuals. "Oh, I remember so well," Jean recalled. "Mary tried to teach us how to laugh rather than to giggle. Mary demonstrated a polite laugh, which the girls attempted, but soon everyone simply broke out in another round of giggling. We just couldn't quite make that," Jean said. "She tried to make ladies out of us, but it didn't stick." By this point, Mary's work was entirely focused in design, not the fine arts. In this, she was extremely successful, but that success transformed the way she thought about art. At one point, she told family members, "I don't think I could draw another watercolor if I wanted to," she said. But those close to her believed this was mostly a preference. "She could probably paint fine watercolors if she wanted to do it," Preston Blair said, "but that wasn't her cup of tea anymore." In terms of work for advertising firms, she was taking on new clients nearly every year. She illustrated campaigns for Dutch Boy Paints, Hanes Underwear, Nabisco, and Maxwell House Coffee. Most of these ads featured some version of the Mary Blair child. As America moved into the second half of the 1950s, Mary's work now struck an unintentional chord with American families. Americans were obsessed by how they were viewed by others, with adults often wishing to arrange their homes and their dress to align with popular concepts of an idyllic family. A financially successful father, a doting mother, and happy, free-spirited kids. Mary's work, though ultimately about the wondrous possibilities of childhood, at least on the surface, played into these ideals. Her illustrations for Baker's Instant Cocoa depicted 1950s standards with a sense of whimsy and style. Kids playing cowboys and Indians while drinking hot cocoa with marshmallows. A girl nearly floating into the air with delight, eyes closed while holding a cold glass of chocolate malted milk, and a child raising a cup presumably with gratitude to a parent for the hot cocoa they had just received. The confirmation of 1950s norms had little to do with Mary's intention in art, especially as she had been experimenting with the Mary Blair children since Penelope and the 12 Months in 1940 and the watercolors of South American children in 1941. But these cultural norms now became one avenue through which Mary's work connected with the mid-century zeitgeist. Through that, her work increased in popularity, images of children who completed a perfect family. That summer, the summer of 1956, 3 years after Mary had resigned from Disney, her connections with the studio surprisingly continued to grow, if only by a little. One of Mary's close friends, animator Mark Davis, recently married a woman who had a long-standing interest in art, Alice Estes, who was now known by her married name, Alice Davis. Long before meeting Mark, Alice had been aware of Mary's work. "My mother had been an art teacher," she explained, "and she saw some of Mary Blair's first things, and she got them home and showed them to me. And she said, 'This is a true artist.'" When Alice was 18, she attended Chouinard, nearly 20 years after Lee and Mary had first arrived at the school. While there, she remained interested in Mary's work, especially now that her advertising work could be found in high-circulation magazines month after month. By the time Alice became involved with animator Mark Davis, Mary had already separated from the Disney organization, though Mark stayed in contact with her. He was very aware that his new wife, now 27 years old, would like to meet Mary as she had admired her work for years. During their honeymoon in New York, Mark arranged to spend some time with the Blairs at their house in Long Island. Mary saw this as a special reunion with one of her friends from California, an event that she wanted to make memorable with decorations and food. No one was more impressed with this reception than Alice. Small decorations arranged by Mary could be seen by Mark and Alice the moment they arrived at their house. At one side of the door was a tray with a pitcher full of martinis and 2 martini glasses and a ribbon, Alice explained. And when we came in, we were supposed to follow the ribbon. The ribbon, which went all the way through to the kitchen, and in the kitchen was a candle. As a joke with a bit of style, Mary had put a martini in the window and the candle in the refrigerator. This was Alice Davis's introduction to Mary. Alice was enamored with her, but also interested in meeting Lee, a former colorist who now ran his own studio in New York. Initially, Alice saw him as fun-loving and deeply supportive of his wife. Lee was gracious, kind. He had a personality, Alice said. He could come on like gangbusters and try to do things for you. Didn't seem to be upset, at least at the time, of Mary being made a fuss over. In terms of her first meeting, Alice accepted the image of an easygoing household, Mary and Lee and the 2 kids. It was this image, largely that of the 1950s nuclear family, that the Blairs projected out to those around them, including new friends. But those closer to the family were starting to notice small disturbances in Mary and Lee's marriage, tiny faults hidden within their relationship. "I adored Lee too," Mary's niece Jean said, "and they were just a beautiful couple. He had lots of charisma, but he also had a very large ego. I'm sure he was jealous of Mary because they're both artists." When Mary worked for Disney, she'd brought in a tremendous income, But without that, as she was now only freelancing, Lee was the primary breadwinner. He made his money largely by being a business manager, not an artist. He was all about getting the client's projects into the studio, explained a family friend. Lee was aware that Mary got to fulfill her artistic aspirations a bit more fully than he did. That, in a nutshell, was the problem that rubbed against Lee, that he wasn't able to focus as much on his first love, art, and that his wife was finding success doing just that. Still, Lee was able to mostly mask these emotions, especially to friends and business associates. To most in their social circle, Lee was outgoing, funny, and affable, even if he did talk too much about himself and have one too many drinks, while Mary, though elegant and refined, often came off as shy, choosing not to speak at length about her own projects, even though her work was now extremely visible in advertising and publishing. Instead, the couple floated, as did many married couples at the time, on the general good feelings of the mid-1950s, specifically on their newfound financial success. The post-war economic engine produced a version of America in which the average family saw a year-over-year rise in their actual income, with plenty of money left over for leisure, travel, entertainment, and consumer goods. With the expansion of roads and two-car households, families became more mobile. With easy credit and VA loans, more families owned their own homes. The individuals who saw the greatest financial benefits, though, were highly trained professionals and business owners like Lee. Most adults, especially those who had lived through both the Depression and World War II, found relief and a certain joy in their current prosperity, a period when they didn't need to worry about housing, food, or other bills. This was certainly true for Lee and Mary. They were pulled through the 1950s, as were other families, on a silver stream of financial success. For Mary, the mid-1950s provided a counterpoint to the early 1930s, when, as a student, she worried how she'd pay rent and buy food. The new comforts around the Blairs again transformed Mary's life. From a girl who had been born into near poverty in Oklahoma, to a successful graphic artist wearing designer clothes and living in a custom house just outside of one of the world's largest cities. In ways, she was the image of a successful commercial artist, taking on assignments typical for the cities where she had lived. In Los Angeles, film production. In New York, publishing and advertising. But with each assignment, she had found ways to personalize that work, to imbue it with her own vision, thereby making business assignments into projects that held a higher sense of design, in ways pushing commercial work a little toward the world of high art. I'll be back next week with a new episode. But before I go today, a brief reminder about my new book. This fall, Norton will bring out my book, Making Mary Poppins. It's the story of how Walt's most famous live-action film was made from start to finish. For longtime listeners here, you'll recall that during the pandemic, this was about 4 years ago, we took a look at the lives of the Sherman brothers, and that was the starting point for this book. The material, of course, has been expanded, rearranged, revised since we explored the lives of the Shermans here. Like my other books, it also has a stack of endnote pages so you can see where each piece of information came from unpublished interviews up through material that Dick and Bob Sherman wrote while they were in college. The pub date for this book is November 11th, about 3 months from now. But it's up on Amazon presently as a pre-order. At the moment, it's listed with its full retail price. This book will almost surely be discounted before it's published, Amazon can adjust an item's price many times over 3 months. But if you pre-order today, you'll get the lowest price that Amazon uses on any day from now up until its publication date. So if you want to take a spin back to Cherry Tree Lane and see how this film was made moment by moment, you can find this title on Amazon or anywhere books are sold by entering either Making Mary Poppins or my name, Todd James Pierce. Lastly, as you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just 2 things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us over on Bandcamp as monthly subscribers. On Bandcamp, you will find over 300 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in our show notes. So, until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.